The main question I want to help you answer today is simply this. How do we help our students and our parents tame the tech monster? It has grown to be a monster of epic proportions. I have a 13-year-old son and identical twin daughters who are 11. They're only 19 months apart. So we are sort of in the throes of where this all is starting to come into play. They're seeing all their friends get the technology and the internet connections and the smartphones, and they're not getting them. My daughters don't have anything. My son has a flip phone, and that's it with no internet connection. It's like he's living in 2002. But we have been very open and honest with them, and they seem to understand. And so we'll walk through some of that tonight and how we can get there, how you can help parents get there, and how you can help your children, the kids that are in your ministry, deal with this, because it certainly is a monster. And it's getting more difficult to deal with every day. It's not so much the technology, it's the internet. We grew up with technology, I grew up with technology. But the internet is really the challenge, because there are a lot of dangers lurking there, and the irony of tonight is not lost on me as I'm sharing this over the internet. So there are some wonderful things that come with our connectivity, but as we all know, there are some very dark and dangerous things that come with that. And when we hand our children, our younger generation, all of this access, it's dangerous. And so we need to be very careful. So that's what we want to talk about tonight. Can we tame the tech monster? I believe we can, and that's why I've put this together. Does anyone know what happened on June 27th, 2007? June 27th, 2007 was a day that would forever change all of humanity, in fact. And it was just 10 and a half years ago. Not that long when you consider the course of the scope of human history. But on June 27th, 2007 was the release of the very first iPhone. That was the day it came out, only 10 years ago. Can you even remember before having these things in our pockets, before carrying the world in our pockets? Only 10 years ago it actually happened. Did you know the very next year in 2008, the emergency room, I just read this last week so I don't have the actual statistics, but the emergency room visits from tweens, those kids just between 11 to 13, spiked, if I remember right, 400%, but don't quote me on that. It happened in only 1 year, and those emergency visits were for cutting and suicide attempts. Problems that kids before this generation dealt with, but certainly not on the scale that they're dealing with now. The article that I read was trying to give multiple reasons for that possibility, and they certainly touched on the possibility of it being because we were handing our children these smartphones that are affecting the way they do life and live life and create relationships, and that's the challenge we're facing. And we are the first generation of leaders and parents to try to figure this out for our children, because it was only 10 years ago that it started happening. So there is a move that's rising, and I hope you'll join us. I feel like as I present this, when I share, I feel like it's kind of like picking up a pebble and throwing it in the ocean and hoping that it starts a tsunami, because this problem is so big and the presentation is so small and my pebble is so small. But if many of us can grab a pebble and throw it, maybe we can start that tsunami. So can we tame the tech monster? Tonight I'm just going to touch on a couple of simple opportunities and ways to do that. If you're looking at the outline, you'll see a lot more content, but let's just jump right into it. How do we tame the tech monster? The first thing I share is you don't have to be a tech expert to help kids with tech. You just have to be curious and persistent, right? Technology can be overwhelming when you try to get into it, especially when you're trying to lock something down or set passcodes or set boundaries on things. There are many ways to do that, but it can get very overwhelming. And so I like to encourage those that I share this with, first of all, you don't have to be a tech expert to make it happen. You don't have to know all the ins and outs or be hired to be an IT person. You just have to be curious, and you have to be persistent. Curious meaning simply go read the blogs, start reading the manuals when they show up, actually read through those things because they do still offer some help, and be persistent. Don't give up. You'll hit a lot of roadblocks when you try to start setting some of these things into motion, but don't give up. Find the way to do it and make it happen. So you don't have to be a tech expert. You just have to be curious and persistent as you set out to do it. Second thing, teach parents, as leaders, I encourage you to teach parents to treat internet and technology access as a privilege, not as a right. Here's where we all really need to reevaluate ourselves in this generation, I think. So often it seems kids get tablets and smartphones simply because all the other kids already have them, right? And we don't want our kids or our children or our young people to be the only ones who don't. At least that's how many parents feel. So I would encourage you to encourage them. Don't jump off the bridge just because everybody else has done it, right? What did all our parents and grandparents tell us? Are you going to jump off just because everybody else is jumping off? But essentially I feel like that's what we've all done. Because I've yet to meet a parent who hands the smartphone to their child without any angst. They all have worries, they all have concerns, and yet we're all doing it simply because we don't want them to be the only ones without. So I'm encouraging everyone, don't jump off the proverbial bridge just because everybody else has done it. And this should be a privilege. It's not a right. So many kids think they should get it because everybody else has it. But it's not. It's not a right. It's not something all generations before this generation have had. It's a privilege. And so it's something that should be earned. It should be earned by showing they're responsible enough to handle it, because it is very dangerous. We don't hand our children guns, right? We don't hand them knives unless we're certain that they know how to utilize it. We don't hand them dangerous objects until we know they are old enough and able and trained to utilize something. And so it's the same way with technology. So you shouldn't hand it to them until you're certain they know the dangers and they know how to utilize it. It's not a right. It should be a privilege. Next, we should remove the word privacy from our vocabulary and from that of the children. There are 3 keys to reeling in technology and internet if you've already released it into their hands. They are these 3 keys: oversight, transparency, and accountability. I'll say that again. Oversight, transparency, and accountability. Consider this. Most adults have privacy restrictions set on them and their technology use when they go to work, right? You'll have rules set on you and how you use social media. You may even have blocks set on some websites. You can't access everything in your workplace. So there are restrictions, guidelines for adults when they go to work on how they're supposed to use the internet, where they can and can't go. So why do so many parents, authority figures, hand children this same access with more privileges than the adults have? It seems absurd to me, and yet so many of us do it every day. And so we have to remove this word privacy from our lives and from theirs. Step back in time for a moment with me. I recall as a young person, I'm 39 now, so I'm talking about 25 years ago. But I remember when I would pick up that phone that was still corded to the wall and call my girlfriend, I was not allowed to talk on the phone with the door closed. I had to be in a public place, and she had the same rules. And most everyone I called had those rules. And in fact, when I called, typically a parent would answer, and I'd have to ask for the person I wanted to talk to. And so the parent would always know, number one, this is who they're talking to, and number two, they'd hear the conversation. And here's what we lose when we hand the smartphones, the technology, to the next generation. We're losing that accountability, that oversight, that transparency. And we're handing them a private playground with no oversight, no accountability, and no transparency. And what do you think kids are going to get into when they have this sort of arena without oversight, accountability, and transparency? They're compelled to do the things that they cannot do otherwise. And we're handing this private arena to all of the next generation. And so it's problematic. And not only is it problematic with their interactions, but it's problematic because in 2 clicks they can see anything and everything they want to, and anything and everything they don't want to see. And so we have to be very careful and intentional about what we do with these. Historically, privacy has been non-existent, essentially. Consider the course of the entire human history. Even only about 100, 200 or so years ago, many people were still living in one-room homes. Privacy? No. And yet I hear so many authority figures talking about the children need privacy. The next generation need their privacy. Why? Why? I didn't have any privacy. I had no privacy in my house as a young person. My parents made sure they had access to everything. They could get into everything. And like I said, I even had to talk on the phone in public places, especially if it was speaking with a female. And so we can bring those back in, and I'd encourage you to encourage parents or even in your own arenas to make sure that privacy doesn't necessarily have to be a key word, right? If there's ever a place privacy should take place, it's in the bathroom, right? And yet my kids still use it with the door open. So how much do they really want it? Although I'm constantly encouraging them to close the door. So let's remove that. Let's live like it's 1982 again. Wouldn't that be fantastic? I think we can get there. And implement this idea into your gathering times. Teach this to your kids, teach this to your parents, and implement into your gathering times the idea of oversight and accountability. Next, we should teach tech as a supplement to life and not as life itself. Teach technology as a supplement to life and not as life itself. And this is one of the things that greatly disturbs me when I see the next generation, because they are creating their relationships with words on a screen and pictures on a screen, sometimes more so than with the face that's in front of them. We were created by God to interact face to face. How many of you know that person on social media who always does and says things that you say, they're never like that in person? They never respond like that, and yet they get online and they're just a completely different person, a completely different personality. And it's because it enables people to, I saw a quote from John Acuff just this week. It said, social media enables people to be the worst version of themselves. And then there are others who will encourage them when they do that. And so that's what we get oftentimes from social media. And if that's not the case, then it enables us to only show the best version of ourselves, and neither of those are reality. Because we're only interacting with a screen, and we're not interacting the way God created us to interact, face to face. I talked about oversight, transparency, and accountability, and one of the keys of face-to-face relationships is it provides accountability. That's why we interact differently face-to-face than we see people interacting on social media or through texting or through sharing pictures or Snapchat. Because there's something about that eye-to-eye connection given to us by our Creator that causes us to see the humanity of the person in front of us and relate to them differently than we do when we're simply staring at a screen. And so we need to teach that to our children. It should be a supplement to life. It should not be life itself. Many of us are living in a man-made world, a human-made world. That's what the internet provides us. That's what technology provides us, a place completely made by humanity. That's a scary world. I want to live in the world created by God. That world is where I was created to exist. So technology can supplement life. Those of us who have only recently, the Generation X and we learned this way, right? We were raised without the technology. And so for us, it's more of a supplement to life because we learned life without it. But for this generation, they're learning life with it, and it's all they know. And so we have to find ways to teach them that this is not life. This can help you in life if you use it properly. And so I would encourage you, in your gatherings, put the phones away, right? Collect them at the door. Tell parents you're going to be doing this. Make them put it in a basket or shut it off and teach them that they can interact with what's right in front of them and not what's on that screen. Finally, I want to spend the last few minutes on this. Create filters. Create filters for everything. And I want to talk about two kinds of filters. The first is internal filters, and the first is external filters. Then we'll talk about internal filters. If you're on darrenschalk.com, you'll find these links. Create external filters. How do we do this? The first external filter you can work with in young people is the parents and their wallets, right? I said my kids don't have smartphones because I haven't paid for them or handed it to them. So you can encourage parents in this manner. Because they don't have to jump off the bridge and hand it to them. They have control and power to do this if they're willing to take the leap of faith themselves. The second is physical placement of screens, external ways to filter these ideas. Don't offer any private screens. All screens must be used in the open. Make sure that they're placed in a public space. Don't let the children get into the private rooms, the bedrooms at night with their screens and unlimited internet access because you just have no idea where they're going to end up. There are also more external filters in each individual device setting. So we do have tablets for our kids, and they are locked down through the device settings. So every device is different. Sometimes you have to learn different operating systems. But most of them do have some kind of way to lock the device down. You can restrict internet access, you can restrict app access, you can restrict purchasing access, and so there are some kid-friendly options out there that you can share with parents. Again, there'll be some links on on that article to some of those options. The next external filter you can put into place are simply internet filters. I found that my mobile plan, I'm with Sprint, they give me the ability to go in if I log into my online account, and I can actually set access or filters on each individual phone on my plan. So every phone on the plan, I believe, has at least the lightest filtering option, but I can also completely shut off internet on some of them. So when my kids do have a phone through that has some sort of internet access, I can filter it that way. So your plan may have that if you go online and check that out, or simply call your cell provider and see what they offer. So that's an option. And the other options are some in-home software and or hardware options, things you can buy at the store online. You bring them home, you plug them into your internet, and they'll provide some filters for you. I have one simply built into the router that I bought at my house. It's called OpenDNS. I asked some of the IT professionals what's the best way for me to filter, and there were two sitting at the table with me that night. They both immediately said OpenDNS. It's a little complicated. I've learned to deal with it. But there are lots of other options. Again, you can find them: Torch, Screen, Clean Router, Net Nanny, Covenant Eyes. There's a new one that's gaining a lot of attention, Circle by Disney and Circle Go. I was just talking to a friend who bought this for his home with his young children who had come across some things he didn't want them to see, so he went and bought the Circle by Disney, and he loves it. Very user-friendly, he tells me, and it's a way to lock down the internet, set time limits. So there are options out there for you. You can click on those on that article, and they'll give you more information there as well. You need to do your research. Each one is a little bit different, offers some sort of different filtering option, so check those out. Finally, you want to create internal filters. Create internal filters. And this is where you as children's leaders can really help, I believe. And it simply comes in teaching our children right from wrong, right? Teaching them the biblical view of how we treat one another, how we treat life, how we view sexuality, all of these things that they come across on the internet that can taint them forever. We're creating internal filters when we teach them right from wrong. We've done this at home with a few simple opportunities. We've created a tech contract. You can see a link to that. We went through it as a family. There are about 20 things on there, and we all signed it, and there are various rules and then understandings, and you can do that or encourage your parents to do that. We're trying to model for our children a healthy home relationship. You can encourage your parents in that way as well. And then we want to start and continue the conversation. This is very important. We've tried to do this with our children, and you can do this as a youth leader, and you can encourage your children or your parents to do it as well. Start and continue the conversation. Let these conversations begin at home about sexuality, about life, about how we value and treat one another. And don't just have it one time. Let these conversations be ongoing and continual, stretched out over the course of time. You don't want to bombard them, but we're trying to strategically open the door, have the conversation every month, every few months, as it presents itself naturally. We'll talk about some of these things that our parents were probably uncomfortable talking about, but that we have to open the conversation with our kids, particularly about pornography and sexuality, because it's so rampant. This generation is being raised with a completely distorted view because of what they can find on those connections and just with clicks. And it's very disturbing to me. And I've seen the ramifications of that in so many of our young people. And so I want to protect our children. And I know that you do too. So encourage parents, and you can, in the appropriate context, obviously, with parental permission, start having those conversations. And finally, an easy way to start this conversation is to get this book, and I think we're going to give one away tonight. It's called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. I don't love the illustrations. The illustrations make it look a little more kiddie than it is. There's actually one for younger ones as well. But we went through this book, and it gave our children an internal filter that helped us sleep at night, right? Because all their friends have this stuff. We don't know what they're going to come across. We don't know what their friends are going to show them. And then we're in a spiritual battle here, let's be honest. And then I've asked this question of a lot of people: at what age did some sort of form of pornography find you? And so many people saw something before about the age of 13. And that was in my generation and before, when there wasn't as much to access. So imagine what's hitting our children today. And so this book gives a very simple way to sit down with your children. This one's about for ages 7 or 8 to 12. Did it with all 3 of my kids about a year ago. And there's one for younger ones. It doesn't introduce them to a lot of sexual ideas. It simply introduces them to what pornography is, what it can do in you, and how to respond when you see it appropriately. And so that has really created an internal filter in my children that I bring up regularly and gives you some clear steps into how to go about that. So those are some ideas, and I hope that will help you as you try to work with parents on how to approach these things. And it is a partnership, right? We don't want it to be all in the church, and the family shouldn't feel alone in trying to deal with these things. So we want to bring this together, because when the family and the church come together, there is power there. So I thank you for the opportunity. Kathy's coming now to help.
Thank you, Darren. That is very relevant to our families and our children's ministries, our youth ministries in our churches all over the world. And the information you gave was excellent. I think also please go to Darren's site and download this information, download the whole presentation. We try to stay within a 20-minute segment because of other giving more information from others, but there's a lot more to this, so please get on that site and check it out. So Darren, we've got a few questions for you, okay? As a children's pastor, what are some ways that I can have a productive conversation about this topic with parents and families that are connected to my church?
I think the best way to go about that is to get parents together in a room and let them start talking, right? There's so many who feel alone, I think, in this struggle.
Right.
Because like I said, so many parents are doing it. They're handing their kids the technology, they're handing them the internet, and then nobody's talking to one another about the struggles they're going through. So I would encourage to start, I did this when I was a youth pastor, actually, brought some, and this was back in the early 2000s before internet was really even a problem at that time. But I brought them together and they started talking. I thought I would say some things, and they started talking. And before I knew it, they were talking about the struggles they were having with one another, and I just had to back up and facilitate the conversation. And so I have a feeling if you do that in your church, you will see some real struggles that parents are going through with these things. Take some of this information, do your research, bring it there so you can have some answers and help for them. But I think just getting them together and letting them know that, hey, there's a lot of us dealing with this problem, and we all have some angst about it that nobody's really sharing.
Right.
I think that's a really good way just to start the conversation.
Good. I think that would be excellent, too. If or when a child comes to you and they let you know that they have been viewing pornography, what are some good action steps that a children's minister could take?
Well, the first thing you want to do is don't panic, right? When this comes, it is a moment that is gut-wrenching. You think you're so young, you shouldn't have to deal with this, and so you have to be careful not to panic. You want to assess the situation, particularly as a children's minister. Do you know the parents? Can you go talk to them? Or maybe the child is bussed in. You don't know if that's the case. Maybe you can address it yourself. You've got to be prepared with a biblical response of what human sexuality is. It's a gift from God, right? This was the very first command to Adam and Eve was have kids, right? This is a gift from God, and like all sin, the devil takes what God has made wonderful and he twists it into something sinister. And that's what's happening with pornography and all of the sexuality our children are getting, unfortunately. So we want to teach them the biblical idea of human sexuality, flip that on its head so they know this is a God-given gift. These desires inside of you are from God. They're there for a reason so you can enjoy marriage later in life and enjoy children later in life. And teach them that what you saw there, number one, if they've seen pornography, this is actors acting. This is not the real thing, right? This is not the way God created us, nor is it real. And so let them know that, look, there's a day coming when age-appropriate response.
Yeah.
It's there so you can enjoy it, and let God foster that, and don't let the enemy twist it into something it's not supposed to be.
Yeah. I think, too, I think sometimes young children, when they first view pornography, have a lot of shame. And, they were introduced maybe on the bus. They had no control. They made no choice. It was pressed on them. So helping them to realize to be able to handle that shame in the appropriate ways so that they can then have the courage to say no in the future.
Yeah, and letting them know that those desires are from God is the way I like to make sure that the shame isn't there. Look, you don't have to be ashamed because
Right.
that is planted there by God. Yeah.